Alright, so in this step of the video, I'm going to show you how to prepare your papers that you will be using for your mountains, as well as your moon and your background. So let's go ahead and get started with this. Okay, so we're going to start with our background paper. We are going to be creating a piece using a wet on wet technique with a tissue lift technique as well. And I was looking to see if I have an example. None of these are going to look identical, but I'll show you something to show you what it should look like when you're done, okay? So we'll go through this process. If you're at school, you will have been given this paper. Now, if you were out for some reason or you're at home, you can always work using your visual journal paper. This one's just about an inch taller, so not a lot of difference there. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna be using yellow, orange, and magenta. The yellow and the orange you have in your paint palettes, so you can use that straight from here. The magenta I provided to you at school. If you're working at home and you don't have magenta, which you probably don't in the paints I gave you, you can use red instead. It'll look fairly pink if you add enough water to it. Okay, so I'm gonna set those aside. And the first step we did in this process was paint about, I'd say about an inch at the top in just a solid yellow. And go the whole way to the edge with this. And I will speed this up in some places. Okay, that's done pretty fast. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna add clean water to my paper. So I'm literally just brushing clean water in an up and down motion, right up to the yellow and down. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to wash my brush. I'm going to turn this light down to see if you can see this better. Turn it a little bit back up. And I'm going to go ahead in with some orange. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in a zigzag motion with that orange. I'm just adding a little bit more water into this. I'm also going to add a little bit right at the top here. I'm just kind of dabbing that with the brush. I'm not being like super meticulous. I'm just doing this quickly. And again, up and down. And the water is going to take care of a significant amount of the blending of these colors for you. If you want to see more yellow blending in, you can go back in with your yellow and add a little bit in there. Now I'm just going to pull some of that color down with the water. I'm going to wash my brush out, and then I'm going to come in here again with the water. And now I'm going to start adding in my pink or my magenta. Pretty red in the video, but it is fairly pink. Okay, and now I'm going to start doing a tissue lift. So in order for the tissue lift to work, the paper has to be wet. You're going to press straight down and lift straight up. And I just want you to be thinking about essentially clouds as you're doing this. if I want to lift some off of the yellow, let's see if I can change this light. And if it's not lifting, that just means that you need to go back in with your brush and get that area wet. And then if you want to lift off some of that color, you should be able to go back in where you added the water and begin to lift some of that off. And then if you want to touch up some areas or bring out some different values in the different areas, you can go back in with your paints and kind of add some color in to different areas to make those areas pop. Okay, so this is a pretty fast painting. Again, it's not something that has to be precise, and yours is going to look different than mine. And I've done multiples of these, and every time I do it, they look different. So don't worry about it if yours doesn't look like mine, or you know, you do too and they look completely different. That's fine. And also not unusual that they're looking a little bit different. So you'll set this aside to dry. And when this dries, you're gonna have something that looks like this or like this. So you can see each one's a little bit different, but that's gonna be your background paper. We're gonna let this dry, and then in the meantime, while we're waiting for this one to dry, we're gonna go ahead and move on and do the other papers that we need for our mountain landscape. Okay, so while that's drying, what I want you to do is grab your visual journal. In your visual journal, you are going to be cutting out 3 pages. You're gonna need a pair of scissors. I do not want you to tear this out. So students will oftentimes just skip the cutting part. I don't advise that, because what happens is when you pull on this and you tear it out, this paper is very thick and it pulls the wires with it, and eventually your whole visual journal falls apart. So we're not gonna do that. So what I'm gonna do is I am going to just simply open up my visual journal, take a pair of scissors, and I am going to cut right along that wire edge. Okay, so you're gonna cut 1. Let's do our second one. I'm gonna use that page. So this is an old journal that was left behind. So here we go, 2. And you need 1 more, so let's see if I can find 1 more piece in this journal that I could use. Sure, I can use one of these pages. Okay, here's another page, and I'm going to cut out the 3rd one. Okay, so I've got my 3 papers ready, and I'm going to set this aside. All right, I'm going to be coming back to show you the first technique that we will use in our mountain landscape. So the first one I'm going to show you is going to be the lighter blue bubble wrap. Okay, so here we go with the bubble wrap technique. So we've practiced all of these techniques in your visual journal, and essentially we're just painting them onto a large sheet of paper to create a bigger piece to work with. So if you're at home, you can use the blue that's in your paint palette. You might want to add a little bit of green to it to make it more of a turquoise color. I am going to be using the blue in here and just testing it on. Ooh, that's beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with this. But if yours is a darker blue than that, or it's looking a little more like a cobalt blue, which is like a darker blue, then add a little bit of green and some water to it to adjust the color. So I'm gonna go ahead and paint this on. If you're at school, I will provide the colors to you, so you'll have the blue you want available right on the tables at school. Okay, so just using a big brush, painting it quickly. covering the whole sheet of paper all the way to the edges. And then again, just making sure that this is wet when you go to put on the bubble wrap, because as you guys know, if it's not wet when you put the bubble wrap on, it's not going to work. So let me grab the bubble wrap. I have my bubble wrap here, and I am going to move my paints out of the way. I'm going to take the bubble wrap, press straight down, press it firmly in place. I'm not attempting to pop the bubbles. I'm just pressing them down to make contact with the paper. And then I'm going to leave the bubble wrap on the paper until the paper has dried to get that interesting texture and effect that the bubble wrap creates. Okay, so I'm going to place this aside and we'll do the next technique. Okay, so we're going to get ready to do our salt technique, and for this one we want a darker blue. So you may be saying to me, if you are at home, but Mrs. Hunt, I only have one color of blue and I didn't mix it with green, or I didn't add a lot of water. That's okay. What you can do is you can make a blue violet by mixing a blue with your violet. You could make it more of a darker blue by adding brown or by adding a little bit of black to it. So essentially what you're doing is you're just creating a light blue and a dark blue that'll work well together, okay? The other thing that you might have at home, believe it or not, these are both made by the same company. These are Crayola paint palettes, but you'll notice that this blue is actually darker than this. If you were to paint them side by side, this is a different color blue than this one. So you may also find that you have multiple sets of watercolors at home, that the blues may give you different options. So that's also something you can play around with. Now, if you're at school, again, I'm going to provide you the dark blue. I'm going to give you a liquid watercolor to work with. But if you're at home, you can always use your paints that come in your set, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and paint this. So I'm going to use a little bit of liquid watercolor that I have at home. And I'm going to go ahead and use a very large brush again. And we'll add more water to that because you can see I did not have enough water on my brush. Get a little bit more paints. And you'll see that's really dark, so I'm going to add some water to lighten that up. You can also see that just by the amount of water you use in watercolors, it's going to change your color. So the more water you add, the lighter the color is going to be. The less water you have, the brighter or darker the color will be. And again, you're going to paint right up to the edges on everything, on all these papers. And then you're going to make sure that you clean up your space when you're done so that we don't leave the art room a mess. Or if you're working at home, that you're cleaning your space up when you're done so that you're a responsible artist. Okay, so this has been painted blue, and now I have some kosher salt. At school, I'll be able to provide that for you. If you're at home, you can try any salt that you have available. And then I'm literally just going to sprinkle the salt on there. Now, you know, just like with the bubble wrap, this is only going to work if your paint is wet. Once your paint dries, this effect is not going to work on dry paper. So do make sure that you do this while the paper is still wet. Okay, then once you have the desired amount of salt sprinkled onto your paper, you're going to set this aside to dry, and you're not going to mess with it until it's fully dry. Okay? All right, so we have one more technique to do. So I'm going to clean off my face, and then I'm going to show you the last technique. Okay, so for our last watercolor technique, we're going to be using plastic wrap. We do have one more thing to make before we can finish our composition. So there's one last step after this, but this is the last watercolor technique. And again, we've practiced all of these in our visual journal, so all of these should be pretty familiar to you. All right, so I've activated my purple paint by putting a drop of water on there. You guys know how to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and use my large brush because it allows me to work really quickly before my paint's dry to paint all of that on. Of course, the more layers of paint you put on, so if I go over this again with more purple, it will be more saturated, a darker purple, which is fine. Again, you'll be given watercolors, liquid watercolors at school. If you're working from home for whatever reason, then you can use the pan sets that we have that's given out to you. And to make sure that your paper is wet, you're just going to look for a little bit of shine still on that paper. Once the paper starts to look matte or not shiny, then you know that your paper is dry and the technique is not going to work. So work quickly. All right, your piece of saran wrap or plastic wrap that you're going to use is going to need to be larger than your actual paper, just a little bit. You're going to put this on here. Now, make sure you don't lay it flat, right? You're not trying to smooth it out. What you're actually trying to do is crinkle it up. So kind of pushing it in different little, almost like little fractures of ice, right? So when the ice cracks and you see these little cracks coming along, that's what we're looking for. That's going to give you that interesting texture. So you're not trying to keep that a smooth piece of plastic on there. So it should look something like this. And then again, you're going to put this aside to dry. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we'll do the very last step for our papers so that we can eventually put our final composition together. Okay, for the last step, you're just going to get a scrap piece of watercolor paper from the art room, from the little pink bin at the front of the room that's just left over watercolor paper. If you're at home and you don't have scrap paper or watercolor laying around, you can cut out a half page from your visual journal or even a quarter. You're not going to need a whole lot. So we're going to use a safety compass, and I made it just a little bit bigger than the white part of the compass. So your moon could be bigger or smaller. Let me redo this. So I'm always telling you guys this, and I didn't do it. When you start, make sure you put a circle, mark the center of the compass, hold the center in place. Okay, so it can be bigger, it can be a little bit smaller. The one I actually ended up using, the final piece, was a little bit smaller than that because it's this size. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is you are going to go ahead and paint that in silver. So I will be providing you silver paint at school. Or if you prefer to do it a different color, talk to me about it and we can definitely look into looking at a different color for you. But I tried white and yellow with it, as well as silver, and my favorite ended up being the silver. So, you know, if you prefer yellow, that's fine. You can do yellow. This is essentially going to be our moon or our sun, just whatever this little bit is, in our landscape. So we're going to go ahead and paint that in, and we'll let it dry. And then once it's dry, you'll cut that out. That's going to be one of your last steps. And this silver paint is not watercolor. It is acrylic, so you want to make sure that your brush gets washed out really well, because if it dries in your brush is ruined. So make sure that you let that dry really well, or make sure you wash your brush out really well so that it doesn't get ruined. Okay, so that was a lot and we did it really fast, but now we have all the pieces we need in order to be able to make our final composition. So we'll see how to do that in the next video.